Smoke drifted in long, trembling veils across the plaza that had once been a monument and was now nothing but a scar. Sunlight, dulled to a weak coin by the haze, hung above the black altar of war where Princess Liara lay broken. Her dark purple hair clung to her skin in damp strands, the deep shade of night violets pressed under rain, a cruel reminder of life still struggling in a dying frame. Her armor, a living lattice of obsidian plates and whispering filaments, convulsed against itself as though it could force bone to knit, as though sheer defiance could prevent her collapse. Silver blood pulsed from a puncture wound just beneath her secondary heart ridge, spilling into a pool that reflected the horrified faces of her mother's guards. No one crossed the sanctioned perimeter drawn around her. Doctrine forbade it. History punished it. And the Queen's silence made any attempt lethal. Out of the smoke, a human appeared. His uniform was ruined, his sleeves torn, and the field kit slung against his side was held together by strips of tape and stubbornness. Kalen Dross walked forward as though the smoke were only weather, not a warning. Boots grinding glass into powder beneath him, his gaze fixed not on crowns, nor on rifles, nor on the fanged helms of the honor guard, but on the wound. Rifles tilted up, metal whispering death in the air. Still, Kalen did not slow. He was busy reading a language older than politics, the rhythm of breath, the color of blood, the way a body telegraphs surrender. "You can kill me after," he said in a voice both rough and steady, kneeling and dropping the kit hard enough to jar the hovering drones. "Right now, I need gauze." The nearest guard hissed a curse meant to drive back trespassers and thrust the butt of his spear forward, etched with royal sigils. Kalen caught the haft in his palm and shifted it aside, not with hostility, but with the simple practicality of a man moving a lamp to get better light. His thumb brushed his translator and tuned it to Liara's alien biosigns. 2 pulses instead of 1. Both erratic. 1 frighteningly shallow. The wound tracked at a cruel angle, deep, nicking the septum of her secondary heart. Fluid choked her lungs where air should live. Airway. Breathing. Circulation, he muttered to himself. He pried the armor at its seam and slid in a seal patch, watching as the gel flared from dull to bright when it fused across the puncture. A faint sigh escaped the princess's chest. Liara's eyes fluttered open, iridescent, furious, lucid. For a heartbeat she glared at the stranger's hands before pain crushed her back into the altar stone. She tried to shove him away, but strength had become an idea without a body. "Easy," Kalen murmured. It wasn't the voice of a man staking claim over royalty. It was the tired steadiness of someone who had watched too many die, and would not watch another if he had a choice. A figure descended the altar steps. Queen Serenia, her garments folding sharp as blades, her meteor iron crown hammered thin and merciless. The guards parted like water before a tide, but stopped short of Kalen as though mere proximity to him were a contagion. "Human," she said, her single word carrying centuries of conquest and grief. "If you touch royal blood, law demands your death." Kalen did not pause. His hands moved with cold efficiency, sliding a decompression spike between armor plates. A hiss told him a lung remembered how to work. Only then did he look up, sweat cutting pale lines across soot on his face. "Then tradition can wait 60 seconds, he answered, "because if her pressure drops lower, you won't get to choose whether she lives or dies." Metal groaned under the queen's grip as her fingers tightened around the rail. Rifles clicked off safeties. Drones dipped low, black glass eyes fixing on him. But Kalen tunneled a catheter into Liara's secondary inlet, hung a microbag of stabilizing nanofiber, and watched the glittering infusion thread into her veins. He knew he was walking a cliff edge, where culture and mercy shear apart. He had fallen harder before, and had learned the truth that bones, like principles, calcify stronger under stress. The microbag emptied. Liara's chest hitched, then drew a breath, not a gasp, but a decision. "Name," Kalen said softly, "because it's easier to fight for a person than for a title." The nearest guard snapped an answer before thought could stop him, "Liara." Kalen nodded as though given a tool at last. Liara, he repeated, steady as a metronome, his bare palm pressing against the seal patch so his body heat would help it hold. Flesh against flesh, a steadiness older than medicine itself. The battle faded into a hush that belonged neither to victory nor defeat, but to witness. The kind of silence when even enemies admit the value of a single breath. The queen did not move. The guards did not move. Only the medic moved, grimy and precise, as he built a bridge out of pain with suture, patch, and the reckless authority of someone who had lost too many and refused to lose again. When the seal finally held, when the pulse beneath his hand steadied into a pattern, Kalen leaned back and let the world remember how to turn. She's not safe, he said, voice low but firm. But she's reachable. And then, meeting Queen Serena's gaze without flinching, he added, if you want her to live, let me keep working. The guards cleared a circle, not because the law allowed it, but because Serena's silence had become its own law. Drones shifted aside. A portable field generator flickered alive. An altar slab rose, reluctant but useful again. Kalen and two guards slid Liara onto it with a motion so practiced it looked choreographed. Her breath snagged, then steadied. Fingers curled weakly, halfway between fear and fight. Kalen caught one hand and rested it against his forearm. You're doing well, he said. Not comfort, not flattery. Data. Stay with me. The minutes stretched into a narrow bridge across chaos. He worked in low narration, breath entering, lattice holding, pressure rising, because sometimes bodies listen when minds cannot. Serena drew closer, blade curious, and for one long inhale they occupied the same fact: life is complicated, breath is simple, and rank erodes where those truths meet. Liara's eyes cracked open, unfocused and stubborn. Her lips moved. The word came late, soft and astonished. Why? Kalen checked a clamp, his expression bare of poetry. Because I fix what's in front of me, he said. Because he had not been fast enough once before, and remembered the names. Because the dead don't learn, but sometimes the living do. And in that answer, a dynasty trembled without knowing it. The pavilion they gave him was a contradiction: canvas walls under the shadow of obsidian palaces, a bed of cots where servants once drank wine. The air smelled of sterilant and desert dust, as though the place itself wasn't sure if it wanted to be a ward or a grave. But each morning, as the palace lamps dimmed to mimic dawn, Kalen Dross left his tent and walked the colonnade toward the chamber where Princess Liara rested. The guards never lowered their spears. They didn't need to. He walked as though they were no more than statues, his purpose a straight line through their contempt. Not defiant, not deferent. Simply, unstoppable. Inside, the chamber remembered war in its geometry: stone angles, cold light, no softness. Yet the filtered sunlight through the windows made a different argument, bathing the room in a warmth the architects never intended. Kalen checked seals for leaks, measured the rhythm of her secondary heart, adjusted the nutrition lines. Every motion narrated softly in his rasping tone. Seal holding, pressure stable, good, that's good. At first, Liara met him with the rigid silence of a princess raised to weaponize composure. But sedation and suffering peel varnish away from anyone. Spasms gripped her body. She clutched the rail, jaw clenched until her teeth shook, staring at frescoes painted centuries earlier as if she could break them with willpower. When the pain eased, she would study him, not like an animal, not like prey or curiosity, but as though trying to map someone who shouldn't exist yet did. Kalen never pressed words into silence, but when she asked, his answers were stripped bare. Are all humans so reckless with their lives? Liara whispered once, her dark purple hair spread across the pillow like twilight. He surprised them both with a soft laugh. A sound worn smooth by ghosts. No. Most of us are careful. I wasn't. So I had to learn how to be careful with others instead. The translator mangled irony into sincerity, leaving only truth. Palace physicians rotated in and out, immaculate in white robes and sharper in contempt. Their instruments gleamed like jewelry. Their disdain was colder than the glass they carried. Kalen didn't argue. He conscripted them. You, he said, handing clamps without pause, warm this under your arm. Heater's dead. You, keep her breathing steady, count with me. Inhale. Exhale. Hold. Now again. His tone made refusal feel like incompetence. Slowly, reluctantly, their hands steadied. In their notes they wrote the human. Never his name. Yet when alarms screamed one night and Liara's pressure collapsed, it was one of those physicians who counted cadence with Kalen, breaths and numbers until the storm passed. Word spread in the palace gardens, a human with a ragged kit commanding physicians, holding a princess's pulse. Courtiers lingered in the doorway, pretending to admire stonework while hunting for treason in every stitch of gauze he laid. On the fourth night, the city winds shifted, carrying salt from the estuary. Liara demanded to sit upright. Every text would call it too soon. But Kalen knew dignity is medicine. He braced her with pillows, an arm steadying her trembling shoulder, his breath matching hers until both lungs remembered how to share rhythm. Her gaze caught on the scar splitting his eyebrow, an old mark etched by survival. That one? She asked. Bar fight with a ceiling, he said, letting her decide whether that meant an explosion in a triage bunker or a tavern fistfight with a broken bottle. Trust in palaces grows like moss, slow, in shadows. She learned to close her eyes when he warned of a sting, not flinch so hard the line jumped. He learned to shape her name in her mother tongue, soft consonants blooming if he leaned the word slightly left. One morning, she asked without looking at him, do humans believe the dead listen? Kalen adjusted the neural stim settings. Doesn't matter. I talk to them anyway. The Queen's drones passed every 12 minutes. And every 12 minutes, he ignored them. On the seventh day, Queen Serenia appeared at the threshold. She did not enter. She only watched, long and silent, as Kalen explained the breath trainer to Liara. The princess forced the ball to rise, grimacing but unbroken. She stopped only when he said enough. Serenia's hand flexed against the doorframe, her face split by a corridor's knife of light, rage in one half, recognition in the other. She left without speaking. Later, when a minister suggested moving the human out of sight, the court discovered silence can be more lethal than decree when it comes from a queen in meteor iron. That night, Liara gestured toward his hands. Square, scarred, built for repair. Show me where it cost you, she said. For a heartbeat, Kalen looked like a man asked to open a locked room. He turned over his right hand, tracing pale lines. Collapsed tunnel. Man who woke mid-amputation. He touched his chest, almost shy. And here. Where I keep the names I wasn't fast enough to save. She didn't reach for him. Didn't pretend to console. She did the braver thing, let the words stand until they became architecture in the room. That night she slept without clenching her jaw. And Kalen walked past the drones like a man crossing a bridge only he could see. But not all dangers wear shadows. Sometimes assassins arrive in white coats. It began with a whisper in the air system. A recalibration, ordered by no one who would later be named, shifting the gas balance just enough. A human would be dulled, a royal would endure, but a princess relearning her heartbeat? She would suffocate in silence. Kalen noticed sideways, the way a man catches grief. The faint change in the ventilator's tone, a machine clearing its throat. He moved instantly, unclipping the intake, slamming a portable filter into the line. The chamber's readings blinked green, smugly compliant. But Liara's eyelids fluttered, monitors misbehaving again. Kalen was already on the intercom, his voice as cold as surgical steel, lock the system. Check bypass by hand. Now. The wall side open. Something slid inside. Wrong. Man-shaped, but moving like a question mark, joints too fluid, skin too smooth. Engineers would later swear all seams were sealed. Guards would swear no entry had been possible. The Queen would swear nothing at all. Kalen didn't swear either. He stepped between the intruder and the bed. Not heroic. Just practical. Distance is medicine, too. Razors blossomed along the thing's hand. Kalen's fingers found the only weapon he trusted, a suture clamp. He struck the wrist aside, his other hand slamming the shroud control. A hiss. A cocoon of translucent polymer sealed around Liara, buying her 30 heartbeats if he failed. The assassin lunged. Kalen met it bone for blade, pain opening his shoulder, hot and mean. He drove forward anyway. Pain was only a gate. And someone was on the other side who needed him. He jammed the clamp into the vent at its throat mask. Black fluid coughed free, acrid as burnt mint. The thing recoiled. Kalen turned, hit the alarm. Guards thundered in, armor like a storm. Queen Serenia entered last, impact carved into flesh. Guards pinned the intruder to the stone with a spear. Kalen didn't look back. He was already sealing his wound with one hand while the other checked Liara's line. Pressure steady, he said aloud. Intake cleared. Secondary heart holding. Saline, now. A guard, knuckles bleeding, delivered the tray. When the canopy lifted, Liara found him pale, shirt soaked, but steady. Her voice scraped out, ragged humor intact. You bleed on my floor. He smiled, remembering the trick. Occupational hazard. The Queen stood silent, meteor blade in hand. Not raised. Just present, like tradition itself. There will be more, she said. Kalen nodded. Then make the scent expensive. And in the silence that followed, something ancient shifted. The days that followed felt like walking across glass, every step sharp, every sound waiting to shatter into threat. The assassin had been dealt with, its body sealed away under layers of protocol and silence, but everyone in the palace knew silence did not erase intent. Someone had wanted Princess Liara gone. And not just gone, erased so completely that rebellion would be reborn in whispers of weakness. Kalen Dross kept to her side. He didn't leave her chamber except when necessity pulled him, and even then, his shadow seemed to linger behind. The nobles loathed it. Courtiers in jeweled robes hissed behind closed fans that a human, a nameless stray, stood closer to the air than any sworn guard. Physicians swallowed their protests, their hands steady only because his eyes made refusal impossible. But Liara, her strength grew. Her dark purple hair, still tangled with pain, had begun to shine again under the filtered light. She sat upright more often, her voice steadier, though her words cut with an edge that had sharpened during her ordeal. On the 9th day, she called for an audience. The court assembled in layers of silk and suspicion, nobles lined like blades sheathed in etiquette. They expected weakness, a frail heir speaking soft platitudes, something they could control. Instead, Liara entered seated in a floating chair, her posture upright, her gaze unyielding. She wore no crown, only the scars of survival and the strength that suffering lends. At her side, Kalen stood in a blood-stained tunic, his battered kit strapped across his back. No armor. No sword. Just a man who had refused to leave. Gasps hissed through the chamber. Ministers bristled. A patriarch from the coastal provinces raised his voice, invoking lineages, treaties, laws older than memory. But Liara raised her hand. And the room obeyed. I name him Shield of the Crown, she declared, voice steady enough to cut stone. The chamber froze. Disbelief thickened the air. For centuries, no foreigner had ever been granted such recognition. The title was not symbolic. It was a promise written into law. The shield could act without order, could stand between throne and blade without reprisal. Not because he fought for me, Liara continued, her eyes sweeping across the court, but because he stood where none of you dared. When I bled on the altar, you looked away. He bled for me. Twice. Her words carved silence into obedience. She turned, and in that turn the gravity of the chamber bent around Kaelin. A murmur rolled through the nobles like a storm cloud. Some voices spat outrage. Others spoke calculation. One minister, half her face replaced by a golden censer, stepped forward. "If he is your shield," she asked coldly, "will he kill for you?" Liara met her gaze with the calm of someone who had survived her own mortality. "No," she said. "He will live for me. And make the ones who try to kill me face truths they cannot bear." The murmurs rose again, louder, sharp as breaking glass. Yet no one stepped forward to break the moment. Kaelin did not bow, did not speak. He simply stood, the coronation blade across his palms when Liara placed it there. For 2 centuries the weapon had remained unsheathed, dormant, a relic. Now, across the weight of histories, she pressed it into his hands. He lifted it slightly. Not in salute, not in defiance. Just enough to say, "I accept the burden." Later that night, when the garden lamps cast pale arcs over the polished walkways, Queen Serenia came alone. Her robes were stripped of ceremony, her crown absent, her face unreadable. She found her daughter walking carefully, her knee braced, Kaelin adjusting the straps so every step landed steady. Liara looked up at her mother, her hair dark violet fire under moonlight. "You've made your choice," Serenia said. "And made it public." "If I must be queen," Liara replied, her voice soft but immovable, "I'll rule from the edge of truth, not behind lies." The queen's gaze slid to Kaelin. For the first time she truly looked at him, not as trespasser or tool, but as something harder to name. The silence stretched long enough to test the balance of stars. "Guard her well," Serenia said at last, each word like steel drawn slow. "If she falls, the galaxy will never forgive you." Kaelin's reply was simple. "If she falls, I fall first." The court had its scandal. The galaxy had its rumor. But the daughter had her shield. And for the first time since the altar, she no longer looked afraid. The rebellion began as whispers in distant places. Old enemies stirred in the bones of forgotten empires, gathering the dispossessed, the angry, the desperate. They spoke of corruption, of betrayal, of weakness in the royal line. They spoke of a Terran standing beside the heir as though he had been born for command. Stories twist fast. In the minds of Virellin's reach, Kaelin's name became prophecy, humans rising again, not with fleets, but with infection, with ideas. Neither Kaelin nor Liara knew of this. In the ward, he still checked her pulse with thumb and discipline, while she practiced standing without his brace. Yet outside, the storm was already shaping. The first world to vanish was Virellin's reach. Its communication relay blinked out mid-transmission. A diplomatic envoy was sent. It was vaporized in orbit. War did not arrive with a declaration. It arrived with absence. With silence. With the kind of scream that never reaches its target. The Royal Armada mobilized. And though Kaelin was not meant to be there, though the court expected him to remain behind the citadel walls, safety wrapped around the air, War did not care for titles. When Liara boarded the cruiser Color's Oath, she found Kaelin already seated in the hold, his kit open, trauma injectors lined, pulse stems ready. "You're not cleared," she said, more ritual than protest. "You didn't give me an order to stay," he replied, not looking up. And when the engines roared, when the stars tilted and war began, she said nothing more. The cruiser Color's Oath cut through black space like a blade through cloth. Its hull still bore the scars of past campaigns, but its engines sang with grim purpose. Inside, corridors buzzed with soldiers reciting oaths older than their bloodlines, while engineers whispered over reactor cores, patching fractures with prayers disguised as welds. Princess Liara stood on the command deck, her dark purple hair tied back from her face, her body clad in battle robes refitted to honor the limits and strengths of her healing frame. She had shed the weight of ceremonial silks. What she wore now was lighter, purposeful, forged not for pageantry but for survival. Kalen Dross remained in the shadows of the rear hold, inventorying medical packs, pulse stems, and injectors. He had already treated 4 soldiers before the cruiser even reached its coordinates, one with a collapsed lung, another in spinal shock, 2 dragged from a shattered exosuit whose legs bent the wrong way but whose hearts refused surrender. His hands shook only when idle, never in motion. When the first strike hit, it was not glorious. It was chaos. Silence broken by screaming metal, atmosphere bleeding into void, alarms howling. Rebellion had no honor, only hunger. Kalen moved through fire and ruin the way some men move through memory, calm because fear had long since been spent. He pulled a captain out from beneath rubble, ripped a child soldier free from a wall that had half melted around her arm, tackled a rebel blade away from Liara when she stumbled against a collapsing strut. Not because he was a killer. Because she had fallen, and in his world, she did not fall far. Liara rose with her helmet cracked, her eyes alight not with vengeance but with clarity. She called orders across the deck, her voice steady in the maelstrom, shaping a retreat into a stand. Her people obeyed not because she was air, but because she did not flinch. When the battle ended, the silence felt heavier than noise. Smoke clung to the hull like mourning cloth. Bodies lay where they had fallen, friend and foe alike. Kalen's uniform was stained dark, his shoulder still bound from the assassin's blade, but his posture carried no collapse. Liara limped to his side, her breathing ragged, her crownless head held high. She pressed a trembling hand into his. "We are not done," she whispered. Kalen's thumb brushed her knuckles, blood crusting into the creases. He nodded once. "Then neither am I." Later, in a chamber that smelled of scorched steel and antiseptic, Queen Serenia read the reports without expression. Page after page, she traced the battle in ink and silence. She paused only when she reached the line that recorded her daughter's wound, and the human who had stood over her like a wall against fire. Slowly, deliberately, she set the pages aside and reached for the meteor blade she had not touched in years. Across the stars, other empires watched. They watched the human who refused to kneel, and the princess who refused to fall. They watched the line between servant and shield blur into something old, something sacred. None dared to name it aloud, but every throne room knew a truth had shifted. War had begun. But the first soldier of this war did not wear a crown. He carried a medkit, his hands scarred with failure and refusal, his heart tethered to a pulse he had sworn not to lose. He had nothing left to gamble. Except her. Rumors crawled through the galaxy like veins of fire, that the heir had survived, that the assassin failed, that a Terran medic had touched royal blood and lived. In the alleys of rebel worlds, his name twisted into prophecy. In the halls of the capital, his presence bent tradition. And on the battlefield, his shadow lengthened, until Kalen Dross became more than human. He became symbol. Liara, no longer merely air, walked beside him, her every step defiant proof against fate. Together they carved a space between legend and survival, between empire and rebellion, between death and what came after. The rebellion spread. Worlds flickered out like dying stars. Yet in every report, in every battle hymn, in every whispered rumor carried by merchants and deserters, 2 truths persisted. That the princess with violet hair had stood unbroken. And that her shield had stood beside her, bleeding but unyielding. And that, my friends, is where our story leaves them, not at the end, but at the edge of something far greater. Kalen Dross, the nameless human who walked through smoke and chose to save a stranger, had become the shield of a dynasty. And Princess Liara, whose blood nearly ended her, rose with scars that were not weaknesses but declarations. Together they had reshaped law, rattled thrones, and lit sparks of rebellion across the stars. But more than rebellion, more than politics, what we've seen is a quiet truth, sometimes history pivots not on empires or armies, but on a single decision to reach forward instead of turn away. Kalen could have walked past the altar. He didn't. Liara could have surrendered to tradition. She refused. And because of that, the galaxy changed. Now, as rumors turn to wars and wars turn to futures we can't yet see, one thing is certain, the legend of the shield and the princess will be told in every language, twisted by every throne, carried on every starship. And whether it ends in tragedy or triumph, no one can unwrite the moment when a medic laid down his life, not with death, but with stubborn, relentless devotion to another's breath. If you enjoyed this story, don't let it end here. Share it so others can witness it. Like it so the algorithm knows you want more. And most of all, subscribe, because the galaxy of stories is vast, and we've only just stepped onto the path. Until next time, keep imagining, keep questioning, and remember, sometimes the smallest act is what saves the future.